stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. My book, based on this podcast, is designed to help walk you through a similar process as my podcast guests experience, to help you identify specific points in your life that can become some of your best stories to share. The stories you share matter. They color your memories and your self-confidence. They help create your internal messages, and they impact the perceptions of the people around you. This book will help you uncover those stories that continue to shape your internal perceptions and your relationships. The pre-order campaign, similar to a Kickstarter campaign but for books, was extended by a few days because I was so close to reaching my goal of 250 books pre-ordered. To get your copy and to take advantage of the early investor bonuses included, visit my website, elkinsconsulting.com, and click on the Pre-Order My Book button. I sincerely appreciate your support.
I just can't really believe that I'm sitting here at Lincoln Center, this outdoor venue where in the summertime every week they have a production. And I'm sitting here with my friend Marcia Polas in New York City at the Lincoln Center. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for coming to meet me.
I'm so excited for this for two reasons. I love doing these recordings in different places where you can kind of hear the ambient sound around us. And yet it just feels so intimate despite the sounds of being in a public place. So I'm excited to jump right in. Basically, Marcia and I met, we were just talking about this, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, where she was living in Denver and not particularly happy where she was. And I was working for a company that wasn't treating me very well. And we connected over the difficulties of life and still having an attitude that things would change. Neither of us ever fell into that poor me place. And I
don't know. I think I've had some poor me days. I think that there's some people who have known me at least as long as you, if not longer, and thought, oh my word, she's insufferable. Or she was.
Well, I do remember some long crying jag phone calls.
Oh, so many of those.
But I have to tell, so Marcia taught me some positions from her Pilates experience, and she has taken Pilates to a whole different level in the last 8 years. But what I remember most about our relationship back then was when I had driven from Missoula, Montana to Helena, Montana with our 2 boys, just the 3 of us, in winter. And it's usually about a 2-hour drive, and it had been snowing and blizzarding, and it took us almost 4 hours to get home because I was going about 25 miles per hour in the middle of the day. And I remember I got home and we got on a FaceTime call.
In your kitchen.
In my kitchen. You remember that. We were in my kitchen. And I had had such a rough week at work. My boss was particularly mean to me that week. And I remember just struggling to keep it together. And we were visiting, and I was smiling. And I said, oh, I'm just so tired. It was such a long drive. My back and shoulders are just so tight from driving white-knuckled all the way back from Missoula with the boys in the car. And you said, well, do me a favor. Go get a chair and sit down. So I set up the phone so that you could see me sitting on a tall stool in my kitchen. And you said, okay, you ready? I want you to breathe in through your nose and breathe out through your mouth as far as you can breathe out. And I did it. I went in once, and I came back out, and I had these sharp shooting pains come up into my chest.
See, this is where memory, because I probably told you to breathe in and then breathe out, and you did breathe in through your nose, and I yelled at you and told you to let go of that and to take the air in through your mouth and keep it open, because I don't let anybody ever breathe in through their nose. And that's why you had the sharp shooting pain, because all of a sudden you weren't filling your chest up with air. You were allowing some air to come in, and then you were forcing air out and releasing all of that tension. The bad tension.
Oh my gosh. All I remember was these shooting pains through my chest and my back. And you looked at me and you said, okay, calm down. I was like, that hurts. And then all of a sudden, tears started streaming down my face. And I'm not a crier. It's just not something I do very often. And I remember tears streaming down my face, and uncontrollable, like that breath and those sharp pains had released a flood of emotion and pain.
That you had been holding.
That I had been holding.
You'd been holding in your chest, and you let it go, and you were able to let it go.
Which is something I've been able to do without tears since then. Mm-hmm. But I remember that so vividly.
I remember that too. I remember thinking, oh no, I'm not even there, and I've just made a mess.
Well, I was lucky enough to have the two boys, and even though they were little, they came downstairs, Mommy, are you okay? And they just hugged on me until I was okay. But I remember that so vividly. And the other thing I remember is when you were teaching me that stretch laying on my back, and I had been telling you about the headaches that I had been having. And I said, I just hold all my stress in my shoulders and my neck. And as you were manipulating where I was laying and how I was laying, and rolling up a towel to put under my neck and rolling up a towel to go under my low back, and you said, Sarah, I don't think your headaches are coming from your neck. They're coming from your hips. And it was a couple years later, I found out that my hips were tilted. And so absolutely my headaches were coming from my hips. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, Marcia told me this 2 years ago.
I like to say that I only know one thing, but I'm always right about it. I'm a one-hit wonder. I only know one thing, but I really know that one thing. So I can only talk about one thing because I only know one thing, but I'm dead certain that I'm right about it all the time.
Well, let's talk about that one thing.
Sure.
What I'd like to talk about is how you discovered this knowledge that you innately understood body mechanics, that somehow you understood. I mean, you've learned a lot through teaching yourself and also through classes and stuff like that. But what was that pivot point where you realized, oh my gosh, this is so natural for me?
Well, I've had really great teachers. I've been lucky enough to have really great teachers. But the first time I think that I even had the smallest inclination that this might be something that I had a natural affinity for, I was actually with one of my mentors in Cleveland, Ohio, Troy McCarty, and I was only teaching Pilates at that time. I wasn't teaching any of the body work at that point. I was simply teaching Pilates. It was my first full year on my own, so I had apprenticed for a year, or what I called apprenticing for a year, where I was still in advertising, working about 80 hours a week, and I was teaching in Stacy Sims' studio, Pendleton Pilates, 20 hours a week. And that was part of understanding that I was someone different when I was teaching than when I was in advertising. And I liked the one person. I really didn't like the other person. Mm-hmm. But then my first year on my own, I was in Cleveland, and I was somehow, I think I'd just gone up to take a couple of classes or to take some privates from Troy McCarty, who's a genius Pilates teacher and has been at it for a very long time. And I think I worked on him a little bit. Maybe he let me teach him a little bit, and he was teaching me. And he said, you really have some of the best instincts I've ever met, I've ever come across. You have a natural affinity, and you have really great instincts. You have a lot to learn, but I've rarely met someone with instincts as strong as yours. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that everybody didn't just get this way.
Did you believe him?
I was really flattered, and it made me sort of step back and think about something, because I didn't feel like it was a compliment that was being given as a compliment. It was something that he was noticing, and no one had pointed something like that out to me before. And I think that I did believe that was possibly true based on the response that I had from people when I taught. So I think that was the beginning of it. And it's just been over the last couple of years that I've started to really accept the fact that I see things in a different way than other people do. Mm-hmm. But most of what I do and what I teach and what I believe in is awareness. But also, I think I see bodies the way that they're meant to be versus the way that they are, if that makes any sense. So I don't see someone and say, oh, well, they're out of alignment. I see them and see where their body wants to be in alignment, what it's supposed to look like. And so it's just allowing it to come back to that so that they can be effortless.
Do you remember the first time you worked with a client where you saw that and you were able to make the adjustment?
Well,
or help them make the adjustment?
Early on in teaching Pilates, it was really apparent to me. Even very beginning when I started teaching, when I was an apprentice teacher, I would see someone on the reformer and I would think, that needs to move and that needs to shift. And I know I had this thing where I would walk around and I would watch from one end or the other for what I could see. So I think it's just something that's always been a little bit of what I've done. I don't think that there was a moment. It's changed and it's evolved as I've grown in my practice as a somatic practitioner, and the things that I've learned how to do. That's certainly evolved.
Well, I think about how your whole business has evolved.
Ever evolving. Probably still evolving.
Yes,
Might evolve again tomorrow.
I hope so. Well, that's kind of what we have in common.
Yes.
Is we're always kind of looking for what we do naturally well and how that applies to helping the next person in whatever context that is. So I was thinking about that when I wanted to interview you for this. Was one of the things that most fascinated me as you were getting started was your work with baristas and bartenders, because I know bartenders often they'll do it for a certain number of years, but their bodies just can't hold up.
Yeah.
And I saw some of the work you were doing through Facebook and some of our conversations. And I was so fascinated because you said work shouldn't hurt, or what was your mantra?
My tagline.
Yeah, your tagline.
My tagline is because it shouldn't hurt to do your job.
Right. So, and I turned that around. I said work shouldn't hurt.
Yeah. It's not supposed to hurt.
Right. So tell me about the first time you worked with bartenders where you had that, oh my gosh, this is really important work.
Well, the bartender thing began because I was working with a group class and private client who happened to be a professional ballet dancer. And he was a professional ballet dancer, and he was also a professional bartender and managed a bar. At that point, one bar in a restaurant. He ended up opening others while I worked with him and having multiple locations. But he was bar manager of one bar and a bartender, and he was also a professional ballet dancer. And he was having these issues, and we were working on these issues relative to a shoulder issue and
to his dancing.
Yeah.
As far as you knew.
It was all about his dancing.
Right.
And I think at that point even I was being invited sometimes into the rehearsal room to be able to get to sit and watch to try and figure out what he was doing, what was causing all of this stuff. And I was already doing fascial work by then, so I was working with him on fascia. And
fascia is, just for our listeners?
All the connective tissue in your body. So the way that I think of it is, healthy fascia is like runny egg whites, sort of.
Okay.
Is how I see it and how I look at it. And unhealthy fascia is more like clear, globby gel.
Okay.
And so healthy fascia allows muscle to do its thing. It contracts and releases, contracts and releases. Unhealthy fascia will kind of hold a muscle a little bit in grip, and that's where we get into trouble with repetitive motion.
Okay.
So if we are repetitively doing something, which all of us now live in a repetitive motion world, each of us have all of these activities that we do over and over again. And so we're using the same muscle groups over and over again. And if we're doing that repetitively, then that fascia can get a little junky because we're not moving in all the ways that our body is able to. And so if the fascia is dense versus nice and gooey and doughy, like a baby's, it can't necessarily release completely when we're not using it. So you can go to bed and still feel muscle gripping. When you wake up,
you experience that tightness.
Yeah, well, when you wake up and feel like your legs are tired,
right,
even though you've been asleep, or you're stiff. You're stiff because those muscles never relaxed. They kept on working during the night, but you weren't moving to keep them warm. And so that's one of those pieces of it. But so I was already doing some fascia work. And by the way that we rehydrate fascia, the way we make fascia healthy, is warmth and manual manipulation. So use your own hands, knead it like dough, soak in hot water and Epsom salt, not things like foam rollers, not things like
because that can bruise it, right?
Well, we're going to crush it. And instead, we want to manipulate it, and we want to be respectful of nerves, for example.
Right. Nerves, for example.
For example, the nerves in all the parts of your body.
Kind of a little bit important.
It feels important to me. And so that's how we rehydrate fascia. So that's we get, and you just work on it a little bit every day. But that's important to throw in there because people will say, wait, what?
Yeah.
Now what do I do about this?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're watching him in the rehearsal room.
Yes, and I'm working on his fascia in between, because so unhealthy fascia, when your fascia is unhealthy or dehydrated, when it's not nice and gooey and doughy, it appears to me as if you're trapped in a fascial cast. I think of it as being like you're in a plaster cast, and you can only move so many ways, as opposed to your body, and your body's being held in kind of a grip, or held in one position, held in a posture, held in an alignment. And so we were working on all of that, and he was having some issues that I was helping him with, and trying to train him to be stronger in certain areas, and I think it was Nutcracker season. And so we were getting through Nutcracker season and doing all of the things. And then one day I was sitting at the end of his bar, having a cocktail and eating, I think, a bite. And I was by myself, sitting and chatting with him and watching him work. And all of a sudden I had this realization, and I thought, oh my word, it's not what's happening on the dance floor. It's what's happening behind the bar. That's that shoulder. Because I was getting really mad at him because I kept on fixing the shoulder.
Right.
And I just didn't understand why he couldn't just use it correctly. And then all of a sudden I realized he was using it correctly when he danced. He wasn't using it correctly when he bartended. And so that was the beginning of working with bartenders. And so I started to figure out how do we re-choreograph him as a dancer? How do we re-choreograph the motion behind the bar so that he's actually using his body in an efficient, effortless way in alignment behind the bar versus
when he's dancing
out of alignment. Yeah, because he was beautiful in the dance floor. He knew how to use his body there.
Because it's trained.
It was trained.
Where you don't really get trained as a bartender to move your body.
Well, you do get trained. Unfortunately, you walk in with certain patterns and habits, and then you get trained how to make a gorgeous cocktail, and you get trained in hospitality, which is the hardest part of that job.
Right.
The great bartender is about hospitality. Yes. Right. And then they know how to make a great drink. But you don't get trained in the biomechanics of the job and of that repetitive motion and then recovery tools. And so watching him, and because he was a bar manager, as soon as we started to give him some ease, he wanted his team to have that as well.
Because then they stay. You're investing in them. You're recognizing their worth.
And he cared.
Right.
He
doesn't want them to be injured.
The relationships within the hospitality industry are amazing. Mm-hmm. And you're never going to find people who care more about each other, who care more about other human beings in general than you will the bartending community. They'll do anything. This is hospitality. They'll do anything for anyone else. Get them to stop and do something for themselves.
So you're sitting there at the bar. I'm imagining you're sitting there at the bar and you see this.
Oh, it looked like, truly, it was like I'd been hit in the face with something.
Right?
Oh,
like a lightning bolt.
I just went, oh. and then truly.
Did you say something at that moment?
Oh, I was making notes on a cocktail napkin.
Was there another bartender behind the bar?
I don't know if there was. I think it was one of those Sunday night things where it was kind of quiet. I'm not sure whether there was or not.
I just asked because I can imagine, because you're so aware of these things in your environment, that you would notice immediately that other bartenders were doing the same thing.
Well, then immediately I did.
Because you're starting to look for it.
As soon as I know what's happening, as soon as I see it, I can't unsee it in someone else. It's like actors. As soon as I see it, I can't unsee it in someone else.
Right. So when you started working with the rest of his team, do you remember a moment where maybe one of them wasn't that excited or didn't really understand what the big deal was? Maybe it was somebody who was young and didn't really understand that their body wasn't going to hold up if they kept doing. Do you remember a person like that?
It's really interesting, Sarah, because when people walk into a situation like that with me, I don't often find somebody who is not going to opt in. And I think we were talking about language earlier, just as we were visiting, and I think some of it has to do with language. The greater norm is standing in front of an individual or a group of people and explaining to them that I understand what hurts and why. And I might be the first person who ever says to them, I know this hurts and that hurts, and you're dealing with this and that. And guess what? It doesn't need to, and we can fix it. And people become very emotional.
Because they've been living with pain.
Because we don't allow the idea that it might not hurt. And we fear giving up our careers. Somebody who is passionate about what they do, the idea that you have to stop doing what you're doing or be in pain forever or wreck your body, that's an awful thing. And being in pain, and even just low-grade chronic pain all the time, it's an awful thing. And there's underlying fear. And you just sort of, we build up a wall, like you were saying with the breath, right? That, we build up a wall, we build up our barriers, our protection, the things that we just think, oh, well, this is just something I have to live with, so I better not. I better
make it
just
worse.
or I better just, I can't think about it because there's nothing I can do about it. And if I think about it or dwell on it, I'm not going to be able to tolerate it. But there's an underlying feeling of I'm afraid, and also this just hurts. And you tell somebody that it's not going to need to hurt anymore, and that you have some solutions for them, and then some tools, and
they don't have to buy in; they're already in.
Yeah, nobody wants to feel bad.
I think one of the worst things that I've experienced as a coach is when people believe they have to buy into something, as if you're trying to sell them something. And especially in our service industry, I find it really disappointing that people are so suspicious that to think that you're not there to help them, that you're just trying to get money, or you're trying to make them believe something that they might not otherwise believe.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of ways that I believe I have learned how to see that and understand that. One is that change is really hard. Change is hard. I mean, any change is hard.
Right.
And everybody's not ready for it at the same time. And sometimes you just have to accept that someone is just not ready for change yet. And that was a really hard thing for me to learn.
Did you have to fire a client?
Oh, I fired a lot of clients. But the bigger piece of it was early on, I used to have people, and this is even, again, when I was, and I say only, but I was only teaching Pilates. I was teaching Pilates for realignment and for exercise. However anyone wanted to buy into Pilates, I was teaching Pilates. That was my full-time, all my attention. And people would say to me, oh, they would give me a phone. They would hand me a piece of paper at the time. This is my sister-in-law. She really needs you. You need to call her. This is my husband. This is my brother. This is my whatever. They really need you. We were talking about you. You need to call them. And I came from a professional marketing and advertising background. And so you follow it up on those leads.
Right. It's a lead.
It's a lead. You follow up.
It's a warm lead.
Exactly. You do what you're supposed to. That's what you do. You follow up on somebody who's interested. You call the client, the potential client. You set something up. And what I've learned is that anyone who didn't come to me initially on their own, they weren't going to make the first phone call or send the first email. Or now I get almost ridiculously, I get almost all of my new clients now from Instagram.
Oh,
people DM me, or people find me on Instagram and then they send me an email or they call me. And they, by people, I mean everyone from somebody like you and I to some of the most famous people that you could ever imagine. So Instagram is a way to understand what I do and to reach out to me. But so however it is that they're reaching out, if they don't reach out to me first, they're not ready.
Right.
And so I have to recognize that and learn. And before I recognize that, I would go ahead and make that phone call. And that person might come in and do one session or a group of 3 sessions, but they never became an actual real client. And that's because they weren't ready. And so when someone's ready for change, they'll find you and they'll find a way to engage. And then there are people also who learn or engage in a different manner. So I think that sometimes in either our worlds, when we're in a large group setting and someone else is paid to bring us in order to teach a large group, sometimes people just want to sit on the outskirts. And sometimes those are the people who are going to actually implement the most change. We just don't know. Everyone is not the same relative to how they take information in, how they'll engage in a room, in a setting, and what parts of that are they've been looking for. And sometimes I think the people who have the most profound understanding and need for something are the ones who will just never say a word and seem like they're not really paying attention or seem like they don't want to be there in that group event. And what ends up happening is they're the ones who come up to you afterwards and tell you their story, and it's so profound for them that they can't do more than sit and listen and take it all in. I think the other thing that we started to talk about, and kind of lost my train of thought or lost my place, is the whole language thing.
Right.
You know, so how are we approaching someone relative to the language that we're sharing information with them? And one of the things that I find is because I speak to people, or I try to in their language. That's part of the reason that I specialize. I study people within their occupation. I study bodies in general. I mean, there's a whole body that is a New Yorker. Please believe me. And living in the city is an entire job unto itself. But when it comes to the professions that I specialize in, the reason that I do that is I'm studying them at work, and I'm finding the things that are going on in a pattern in their job. How do I undo that? How do I teach them how to do something else? How do I give them the recovery tools? Because that is going to be a thing that they're going to do repetitively. And so no matter how well they do it, how efficiently they're moving in their body, how organized their body is, it's still a repetitive motion. So we're still going to have some need to have recovery tools. But also, how do I speak to you so that we're talking about things relative to how you think about them and the sort of the language that's used within your field.
Right.
And if I can do that, then I can show that I understand it. Not that I'm one of them, because I'm never going to be one of them. And it's my hardest. It's the barrier that I have to always
Be aware of. Yeah.
not allow to stop me when it comes to working within any of these professions, because I'm always the outsider.
Right.
But that's where I also win relative to being good at what I do, because I'm not interested in being a bartender. I'm not interested in being a barista. I'm not interested in being an actor or a singer or a dancer. I'm not interested in being a makeup artist.
So there's no competition.
It's just
right.
that I am doing the job that I want to do, and I am laser focused on that job. And so I'm going to be able to take what I know and apply it to that versus having any emotional attachment to my own experiences or wins or losses within that career.
So you're not projecting anything on them.
Yeah, exactly. So, which I think allows me to see things differently.
I think so too, and I think that in many cases, being that outsider actually benefits you, not just because you're not competing with them. You're not in that space with them. You're not going to project with them. But also because, like my friend has said to me in the past, you can't be a prophet in your own town. So if you are internal, oftentimes people dismiss you even if you have brilliant ideas, and you can absolutely help them. So, and that's why Montana is really funny that way. The whole state is funny that way, that they'll bring people in from other places. There are all kinds of great professional resources in the state of Montana, but they'll bring somebody in from Salt Lake or LA or Denver or whatever, because they think that they're going to have something to teach us that somebody internally couldn't teach us.
Isn't that funny? Because I think that that's so different from every profession, almost. Well, not in business. And that's one of the things that I always have thought was really interesting, is that when I worked in marketing and advertising, the idea of bringing in consultants was, you just brought in consultants. You brought in consultants to help figure something out.
Right.
Or to look at things and...
Right, to see things that you couldn't otherwise see.
Exactly. To help be your change agent, to see what was going right and what was going wrong. And I find in a lot of professions that are not that don't have that B2B thing going, that it's a lot harder to allow that and accept that. It's a lot harder to choose to bring someone in from the outside. There's more suspicion.
Right.
And so you've got to, again, that goes back to figuring out the language that you're going to speak to someone in, and allowing people to be ready when they're ready.
And I think that really leads us right back to the beginning of this conversation, is that whole idea of addressing those things with somebody who's ready to address them. And there are so many aspects of that. When at the very beginning of this conversation, when I said that you taught me that it was in my hips, but I wasn't ready to address that. I didn't really know what that meant yet. And it wasn't until a couple of years later I went to an acupuncturist, and he said, well, your hips are tilted, so your spine is crooked when you sit. And that's what's causing your headaches. And I remember that I wasn't ready when you told me that. And not only that, I didn't know what it meant, how I could apply what I knew then.
And I wasn't a regular practitioner in your life either. So
I couldn't see you every week to address it. Exactly. So dealing with it at the time that somebody's ready to deal with it. And I find that same thing happens in my business when I'm doing any kind of workshop, whether it's a stepping out of your comfort zone, storytelling, StrengthsFinder, whatever it is. If I'm brought in for a group, there are always going to be a couple people that just aren't that interested. They're there because they have to be there. And then there are the quiet ones, like you said, that they feel like this is such a profound moment to them that they can't contribute, they can't engage, because as we said earlier during conversation before we started recording, sometimes they don't even know what question to ask yet because they're so overwhelmed by this aha moment that they're experiencing.
Yeah, all new information.
And isn't that kind of the magic of that kind of service that you provide?
Oh, it never gets old, the idea that heads explode when I'm around. Literally, I make heads explode. And because people just haven't...
They never thought about their bodies in the way that you were teaching them.
No one ever said those things to them in that way before. And it makes heads explode a little bit. And it's fun. It is fun. It's fun to give somebody a whole new piece of the puzzle. Right. One of the things that I've had to learn, too, that I think is a little bit interesting, and this comes even from my Instagram account, I have to remember it, but I always have to remember it when I'm teaching anyone. This stuff, I've been working on this and seeing this and doing this for now 15 years, I think. I'm at 15 years of teaching. And so this is just, a lot of this is just old information for me. This is just the basics. And one of the things that I always have to remember is how many times it's okay to tell someone the exact same thing.
Right.
Because and this is one of those things that I always really noticed in teaching Pilates as well, is that a human will hear something when their body's ready to hear it. So you could say the same thing to someone over and over and over again. And I used to say when I was teaching group classes, sometimes I would say if I had a newer person in a group class with a group of people who had been taking from me for a period of time, I would cue certain things and I would say, and engage your serratus. And if you don't know what your serratus is or how to engage it yet, that's okay. Don't worry about it. Just ignore that one. If you do, I want you to do this. And so being able to cue people at different levels of things and teach people at different levels of things, and then the person who doesn't understand that yet, you might be cueing the same thing, and eventually they're going to hear it because all of a sudden their body knew how to, and is starting to teach it to their brain. And so I think that we can repeat things over and over again, and people aren't going to be bored with us or tired
Tune
of
it
us.
out.
Yeah, I think sometimes,
unless they're a kid.
right,
or
somebody who is not who adores you, but is not your market.
Right, it's not your audience.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. I mean, you can look at responses to things in social media, and I use social media. Social media is a business tool to me and a teaching tool to me. It's not my personal life.
Right.
And so when I talk about social media, I talk about it relative to who am I engaging and what am I teaching them and what's their response. So I just want to kind of be clear on that. But I'll look at the social media responses, and if my sisters and I'll look at the social media responses to something or who's following a story or who's responded to something. And if it's my sisters and maybe some high school friends who are not people who also have really engaged with me in the work, that type of thing, then I know I really missed my audience. If those are the only people who are watching. If it's my regular followers who are engaged and who are paying attention, or not people I actually know, and also people, and then that includes people that I teach, that I work with, then I know, okay, this was valuable. I can keep going with this.
This is a good topic or theme or the context of this work.
And it's funny because I think it was at some point this summer, one of my sisters sent me a text, and she said, or maybe it was she's responded to something, and she said, "Oh my gosh, are you still on that? Hasn't it been like a week?" And I said, it has been exactly 7 days, and yes, I am still on it. And I always have to remember that that's okay that she feels that way. She's not my audience.
Exactly.
That particular sister has never engaged with me relative to the work that I do. Mm-hmm. It's not something she needs or is interested in. She's interested in me.
Right.
She's not...
Right, it's not your work.
It's not
totally
the work.
Different
yes,
thing.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. And so finding kind of those things, I think, is important.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, one last story. What is a recent time where you felt like you walked away from something really satisfied, where you just went, oh yes, this is it. This is what I'm doing. I have these at almost every day that I work with a client. I have a moment like this, and I know you do too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm welling up right now because sometimes I'm just overwhelmed by what I get to do.
I'm so grateful.
I'm overwhelmed by what I get to do. And last week, I had 2 new people last week who came to me kind of out of the blue. And each of them walked away with a lot of ease, but one in particular is a singer and somebody who I really didn't think had any need for me whatsoever. And it turns out that she did, and I was able to help. A singer contacted me who I really would have told you. In fact, I told somebody else that she worked with, that's the one person on the planet probably who doesn't need me. And it turns out that she did need me. Something had propped up and she did need me. And she came in and we worked together. And not only does she have the most beautiful instrument of almost any human being on the planet, but she is the loveliest human being. And she just gets it. Oh. And so I was able to, in a couple of sessions, not just do her realignment work, and not just get her started on a piece of the Pilates practice, but really get her deep into her engaged core and give her some things that she can take with her and work with. And she had a lot of ease and great results. And she was so kind and grateful to me. And really, it's just, she had this beautiful instrument that she's been taking the best care of for years, and never let anybody get in the way of her taking care of.
Right.
And a couple of things went wrong, and she trusted me with her body and her job, with her instrument, with this unbelievable instrument, and allowed me to collaborate with her and help her. And it's the great, I mean, I'm not going to lie, it's a really big high. Getting to do what I do is a really big high. I am exhausted at the end of the session, generally. And I have to do the things to take care of myself, mind, body, and spirit. And also, it's like being fed.
It is. It nurtures. It nourishes us.
It really does. It really does. I get a little creepy if I have to have too many days off with bodies. I mean, it's a little bit weird, but
we start looking at waiters and bartenders.
A week of not teaching a body, not being hands-on on a body in a professional fashion I get antsy.
I think most people can relate to that in something that they find really important. Like music. If I don't get to sing at some point, I could just be in the shower singing. But when I lost my voice last winter in January, it was a whole week where I couldn't sing. I could barely even speak. And I knew I had to baby my voice because I had a gig coming up. I knew I was singing professionally. So I couldn't. I mean, I literally could. I had to take care of my voice and not speak and not sing. And it was painful. It was absolutely painful. I don't know if I got creepy, but I definitely, I could feel my confidence going down. I could feel my energy dropping because I wasn't doing what feeds me. So I think many of us have something like that, whether it's reading, people who can't read for a week because their vision is bad, or they get sick, or they get a concussion and you're not allowed to read fine print when you're in that situation, or people who love to listen to music. What if something happens, you can't listen to music for a little while? I think most of us can relate to how painful that can be when we can't do something that we really love.
Yeah, I think for me, it took me a lot of years to find my purpose. And once I found it, this is my passion. It is my job. And also, it's this thing that, I don't want to say it defines me, because I think people get really upset about the idea that your job defines you. But this is my purpose. This is why I'm here.
Not the same thing as a job.
Exactly. That's it. And the job is having to do the billing and the scheduling and the
administrative tasks.
Yes, exactly.
Tell me about
That's the job part. That's the icky part. The rest of it is just getting to do this thing that I love. And so when I don't get to do it, it's hard.
Yeah. And on that note, with the chimes from the nearby church, I think we will wrap up our interview. Marcia, thank you so much for joining me. This has been such a pleasure.
Thank you for joining me.
And thanks for picking a great spot.
In my favorite little hideaway.
It's been beautiful. We'll try this again sometime in a little while and maybe catch up with you again. Thanks, Marcia.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Share Them Will. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com.
How could you tell me that you're going away?